Meet Sarah Reynolds, a 24-year-old woman working at a small, local supermarket in a quiet suburban town. Sarah had taken the job to help pay for college, but the long hours, the monotony of stocking shelves, and dealing with occasional difficult customers had drained her enthusiasm. Still, she liked the peacefulness of the late-night shifts. Less interaction, fewer customers, and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights made it easy to zone out and pass the time. Tonight was different, though. There was something off about the atmosphere when she clocked in for her 11 p.m. shift. It wasn't the usual tired routine. Something felt wrong, but Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on it. The store had closed to customers an hour ago, but Sarah and the night crew still had work to do. She was assigned to restock the aisles, and her shift supervisor, Mike, had gone to the back room to take inventory. Aside from the soft buzz of the lights overhead, the store was eerily silent. Sarah liked the quiet, but tonight it felt oppressive, suffocating. It started as small, almost ignorable things. Sarah was rolling a cart of canned goods down one of the aisles when she heard a faint rustling behind her. She turned, expecting to see a mouse or maybe one of the other workers messing around. But there was nothing, just shelves of neatly stacked products, everything in its place. Shrugging it off, she went back to stocking the shelves. But as she placed the last can on the shelf, she felt it again. This time, stronger. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It wasn't a noise this time. It was a feeling, like she was being watched. Sarah scanned the aisle, her eyes darting to the security mirrors overhead. But again, nothing. She shook her head. "Get it together, Sarah," she muttered to herself. It was just the late hour and the isolation playing tricks on her mind. She went back to her task, trying to focus, but that creeping sensation wouldn't go away. An hour passed, and Sarah had almost convinced herself that everything was fine, that the weird feeling was just a side effect of too many night shifts. That was when the lights flickered. It was subtle at first, just a brief stutter of the fluorescence. But then, all at once, the lights in the back of the store went out. Sarah froze. The aisles beyond her plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flickering bulbs overhead. She pulled out her phone and texted Mike. "Lights went out. You good?" There was no response. Sarah sighed, deciding to check the breaker in the back. As she walked down the aisles, she noticed something strange. There were items on the floor, cereal boxes, cans of soup, even a bottle of soda, all scattered haphazardly. She knew she hadn't left them like that. Her heart began to race, but she kept walking. When she reached the back room, the door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it swayed. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. "Mike," she called out. Her voice echoed, but there was no reply. That's when she saw it, movement in the far corner of the room. At first, she thought it was Mike, but as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized it wasn't. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, standing unnaturally still in the shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to move, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The figure didn't speak or make a sound. It just stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Then, in a sudden, jerky motion, it lunged forward. But before Sarah could scream, the lights flickered back on, flooding the room with brightness. The figure was gone. Sarah stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around wildly, but there was no one there. No sign of the figure. She backed out of the room, her mind racing. She needed to find Mike. Now, as she hurried down the aisles, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Mike. "I'm in the stockroom. Need help?" Sarah stopped in her tracks. That didn't make any sense. The stockroom was where she had just been, and Mike definitely wasn't there. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. She typed back, "I was just there. Where are you?" No response. Suddenly, from the far end of the aisle, she heard something fall, a loud crash, like shelves toppling over. The sound echoed through the empty store. Sarah's heart was in her throat as she turned towards the noise. She didn't want to go look, but something pulled her forward. When she reached the end of the aisle, her blood ran cold. A shelf had fallen over, its contents strewn across the floor. But what caught her attention was the figures standing in the shadows, just beyond the fallen shelf. It was the same thing she had seen in the back room, tall, dark, and utterly wrong. This time, though, it wasn't alone. There were more figures, identical in appearance, all standing perfectly still, staring directly at her. Sarah backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned and bolted for the front of the store, her footsteps echoing loudly. As she ran, the overhead lights flickered again, casting everything in strobe-like flashes. The figures seemed to move with the darkness, closing in every time the lights dimmed. Sarah reached the front of the store, panting, and slammed her hands against the glass doors. But they wouldn't budge. The automatic doors were locked, trapping her inside. She frantically looked around for an escape, but the shadows were closing in. The figures were there, just out of sight, their presence pressing against her from all sides. In her desperation, she spotted the emergency exit at the back of the store. It was her only hope. She bolted towards it, her legs burning from the sprint. As she reached the door, she threw her body against the bar, bursting into the cold night air. The alarm blared, piercing the quiet, but she didn't care. She ran, not stopping until she was halfway down the street. Only then did she turn back. The supermarket was dark, its lights completely out now. The figures, whatever they had been, were gone. The store looked as normal as ever, but Sarah knew she had seen something she couldn't explain. The next morning, Sarah quit her job. She never set foot in that supermarket again, and she never found out what those figures were. But to this day, she can't shake the feeling that something still lingers in that store, waiting for the next unlucky soul who's left alone with it after hours.